The first speaker is Katrina Marson from the ACT. Katrina received her fellowship in 2018. It was a fellowship sponsored by Peter Mitchell, and her topic was to research new, practical and effective methods to prevent sexual violence through youth education. And she travelled to Germany, the Netherlands and the UK. Katrina.
Thank you, David. I too would like to start by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the Ngunnawal land that we're meeting on and the land that I have grown up and lived on and work on every day. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's fair to say that there is a reckoning in this country right now in relation to sexual violence. How we respond to it, how we address it. It's the pandemic really that's reminded us over and over that prevention is better than a cure, and any sexual violence prevention strategy must include universal access to comprehensive relationships and sexuality education. Such education that is holistic, starts young, is age appropriate, is a proven protective factor in safeguarding sexual wellbeing. The evidence bears that out, and I am calling on Australian governments to establish a multi-sectoral task force to invest in the wellbeing of young Australians, to deploy evidence-based policy that ensures access to relationships and sexuality education, to develop and adopt sound curriculum, to equip schools and teachers to deliver it effectively, and to engage families and communities in that empowerment of their young people. Now, as a criminal lawyer, having prosecuted and defended people accused of sexual offences, I've met many whose lives have been ruined by sexual violence. But the criminal justice system is reactive by nature. It only steps in once an individual harm has occurred, and there are many, of course, for whom it will never deliver justice. We must work on preventing this destructive harm before it begins. And that starts in the classroom, not the courtroom. My Churchill Fellowship took me to 6 countries across Europe and North America to witness firsthand the power of relationships and sexuality education. I looked at examples where it had been implemented well, and I compared what was consistent across those countries structurally, institutionally, that meant that this was a priority that was actually delivered on. It is not enough to silo responsibility to individual schools, to the home. This is a community-wide cultural responsibility because this is a matter of public wellbeing, the wellbeing that governments are charged with protecting. It's governments that have the power to drive policy, to ensure implementation through enforceable mandates and accountability mechanisms, and to resource and mobilise their executive arm. So a good curriculum, for example, is one thing, but that's a little bit like furnishing the house before you've laid the foundation, you've built the walls, you've built the roof. What my fellowship laid bare was that for this to work, structural reform is required. And governments were always, in all of these countries, they were always the ones who had stepped up to the plate and taken this on as a matter of public policy, because governments have the power to lay that foundation, build the walls, the roof. What my research does is aims to provide a blueprint of how governments can actually do that, a bit of a implementation guide, if you like, to create the authorising environment in which this public health measure can be deployed and do what it is aimed to do. So it looks at, for example, how did the UK use legislation to mandate access to relationships and sexuality education? How did Germany use its public health department to create a branch that was dedicated to this kind of education? Or the Netherlands in creating television programs and resources for parents? If I can just finish by commenting on something I hope that you've all seen in the media recently in the last few weeks, this clarion call that we're hearing for better access to this kind of education that's come from largely students and former students, their families and other members of the community in recognition of the tragic numbers of people who've experienced sexual violence, often before they've left school. That call is compelling, and that's because it quite powerfully demonstrates something that an expert I met with in Canada on my fellowship expressed, which is that access to information that can be used to make autonomous decisions is a right. And I'm calling on governments to fulfil that right, because if not now, when? Thank you.